of us has our own ideas and opinions. Sometimes we agree with each other, and sometimes we don't. I bet you can remember an occasion in which two of your friends had a major disagreement, and you had to be a peacekeeping, neutral third party. Oftentimes, a neutral third party can help two friends resolve their differences. On a global scale, that's the idea behind the United Nations, a global peacekeeping organization. Let's take a look at how the UN was established and how it carries out its mission to support peace and provide humanitarian aid throughout the world. How was the United Nations established? Towards the end of World War II, U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Prime Minister of Great Britain Winston Churchill, and the leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, met in Yalta, a city in Crimea, Ukraine. These leaders had a shared goal of achieving worldwide peace and stability. They drew up plans for a group of representatives from many different countries to come together and discuss possible solutions to problems that threatened peace around the world. This group was to replace a similar group, the League of Nations, which was established after World War I. It was President Roosevelt who suggested that the new group be called the United Nations. The next step was a meeting called the United Nations Conference on International Organization. This was a gathering of representatives from 50 countries that took place in San Francisco from April until June of 1945. The goal of the group was to write the charter for the United Nations. A charter is the official document that establishes rights and duties of a group. Sadly, President Roosevelt died just 2.5 months before the signing of the charter on June 26, 1945. As a tribute to him, the name United Nations was officially adopted by the group. The United Nations Charter took effect on October 24, 1945, after it was signed by the 5 permanent members of the Security Council: United States, Great Britain, France, Soviet Union, and China, and a majority of the 46 other member countries. Let's review what we have learned about the establishment of the United Nations. Question 1. Which of the following former world leaders met in 1945 to draw up plans for the organization that became the United Nations? A. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. B. Joseph Stalin. C. Winston Churchill. D. All of the above. The correct answer is D. All of these leaders met to draw up plans for the United Nations. Question 2. In what year did the United Nations Charter take effect? A. 1945. B. 1952. C. 1988. D. 2001. If you answered A, you know that the United Nations Charter took effect in 1945. Question 3. The UN Security Council has how many permanent members? A. 3. B. 4. C. 5. D. 10. The correct answer is C. The UN Security Council has 5 permanent members. How does the United Nations work? The Charter outlines the goals and guiding principles of the United Nations. Maintaining international peace and security was one of the most important goals of the new organization. The Charter also established the procedures for how this new international organization would run. Today, the United Nations has 193 member countries. It is a global organization of sovereign or independent countries. Each country has agreed to voluntarily join the organization. Notably, the Vatican is not currently a member of the United Nations. The Vatican, or Holy See as it is called, was granted permanent observer status at the United Nations in 1964. In 2012, Palestine was also granted permanent observer status as a non-member state, which was an upgrade from their previous non-member entity status. As permanent observers, the Holy See and Palestine are allowed to participate in the General Assembly. UN members meet every September through December at its headquarters in New York City. Representatives from the United Nations member countries are divided into different committees. Each committee focuses on different types of problems or issues that people throughout the world are facing. The General Assembly, the Security Council, and the Commission on Human Rights are just a few of the UN's committees. During committee meetings, representatives have the opportunity to discuss issues, problems, and ideas, and present their country's concerns and perspectives. The United Nations Charter also calls for each member nation to have a seat in the General Assembly. The members of the General Assembly would then vote on members to other committees. The General Assembly is the largest part of the United Nations. During the opening session each September, any member nation may take the floor of the General Assembly and speak about whatever issue he or she wishes. The Secretary General of the UN is considered its top official and is the official spokesperson for the organization. The UN Security Council makes a recommendation to the General Assembly about who would best fill the role. The General Assembly then votes and appoints a Secretary General for a 5-year term. The current Secretary General of the UN is the former Prime Minister of Portugal, Antonio Guterres, who took office on January 1st, 2017. Let's review what we have just learned about how the United Nations operates. Question 1. The United Nations currently has how many member countries? A. 100. B. 193. C. 275. D. 550. The correct answer is B. The UN has 193 member countries. Question 2. The headquarters for the United Nations is located in which city? A. Geneva. B. Moscow. C. Stockholm. D. New York City. If you answered D, you know that the headquarters for the UN is in New York City. Question 3. What 2 countries have permanent observer status at the United Nations? A. Great Britain and Ireland. B. Ukraine and Bulgaria. C. The Vatican and Palestine. D. Syria and Iraq. The correct answer is C. The Vatican and Palestine have permanent observer status at the United Nations. How does the United Nations operate in the world today? Although the General Assembly is the biggest group at the United Nations, the most powerful committee is the Security Council. When tensions and conflicts arise around the world, this group of members is primarily responsible for maintaining international peace and security. The Security Council is made up of the 5 permanent members: China, France, Russian Federation, United Kingdom, and the United States, and 10 non-permanent members who are elected by the General Assembly for 2-year terms. All of the permanent members must agree on any Security Council resolution or decision. If even one disagrees and votes against or vetoes a resolution, it does not take effect. The main role of the Security Council is to determine if an act of aggression or a threat to peace exists, and to recommend a settlement to the issue. The UN Charter gives the Security Council several options for helping to bring peace to a region. The Security Council can send UN peacekeeping troops and humanitarian aid into a region, as well as impose economic punishments called sanctions for countries who act inappropriately. And the Security Council can force weapons inspections. Peacekeeping is one of the United Nations' major goals. You might be wondering how the United Nations helps to keep peace in war-torn areas. If the Security Council passes a resolution to send peacekeeping troops to an area, the UN creates a multinational military force comprised of military troops from member nations. This multinational force is under the command of the United Nations and is a neutral third party in the situation. They help to negotiate ceasefires and buffer zones between the warring groups. United Nations peacekeepers provide a wide range of services for people in war zones. They help communities set up and run elections and provide humanitarian services to the local people. Sometimes UN forces provide training for police forces in the area. Military forces under the UN command have also faced the dangerous job of clearing landmines. The UN military forces usually carry only light weapons that are to be used only in self-defense. Members of the UN military force might work with the opposing groups to mediate a solution to the crisis. Sometimes, the United Nations is sent to an area on an observer mission. For these missions, the UN forces are not armed and are there to ensure that agreements between the two parties are being followed. The ultimate goal of the United Nations peacekeepers is to help an area transition from violence and crisis to peace. There are currently 16 United Nations peacekeeping missions throughout the world. Peacekeeping forces can be found in places like Haiti, Kosovo, Darfur, India, and Pakistan. The members of the United Nations are also focused on making the world a better place for children. Have you ever heard of UNICEF? That is the United Nations Children's Fund. UNICEF works to bring food, water, and medical supplies to children who are affected by natural disasters like floods and earthquakes. The United Nations also offers humanitarian aid for many different types of crises that arise around the globe. United Nations teams provide emergency shelter and other services, like coordinating healthcare and education for refugees and other displaced people throughout the world. Teams from the UN also provide humanitarian assistance in dealing with health crises, like the HIV epidemic, and work on challenging issues like climate change and ending world hunger. If you are watching a news story about a war-torn area, you will be able to recognize United Nations peacekeepers. Members of the UN peacekeeping team wear the United Nations insignia on their uniforms and wear blue berets, or blue helmets if the area is dangerous, that are easy to spot. Let's review what we have learned about the types of work that the United Nations does in today's world. Question 1. Which of the committees in the United Nations is thought to be the most powerful? A. General Assembly. B. International Court of Justice. C. Security Council. D. Economic and Social Council. The correct answer is C. The Security Council is thought to be the most powerful of the UN committees. Question 2. How might UN peacekeeping forces provide aid to a war-torn area? A. Set up elections. B. Clear landmines. C. Work with opposing sides to mediate solutions. D. All of the above. The correct answer is D. UN peacekeepers could provide all of those types of aid. Question 3. What color berets or helmets are worn by UN peacekeepers? A. Red. B. Yellow. C. Blue. D. White. If you answered C, you know that UN peacekeepers are known by their blue berets and helmets. What is the Model UN? Do you think you have what it takes to step into the shoes of an ambassador to the United Nations? Well, you might have an opportunity to find out. More than 400,000 middle, high school, and college students take part in a United Nations simulation each year. This simulation is called Model UN, or MUN. Model UN is a simulation of the real work of the United Nations General Assembly. Many schools offer Model United Nations as a club. The club's goal is to help students prepare for their experiences at whichever Model UN conference they choose to attend. In most cases, students from a school will travel to regional conferences to participate in the simulation. At the conference, students are assigned countries to represent. Students will represent their countries at the General Assembly and in any committees of which their countries are members. They will then research their assigned country's perspectives about current issues and problems. Those perspectives are shared with the Model UN General Assembly and in other committees. In order to accurately represent their country's perspectives, students have to research topics like the country's history, current economic status, geography, and trade status. Model UN allows students to gain experience in leadership, negotiating, public speaking, and research. Model United Nations proceedings are formal, just like the procedures followed by the actual United Nations. So students also gain experience and develop skills like diplomacy, and even how to dress as a professional. The goal of a Model UN committee is to work together to pass a resolution to address the specific problems that were discussed. Oftentimes, the problems that students at Model UN face are the very same problems that the actual delegates to the United Nations must face. Recent Model UN conferences have dealt with wide-ranging topics like global nuclear disarmament, combating illegal trade in wildlife, and preventing violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. At the end of a Model UN conference, awards are usually given to outstanding participants. Let's review what we have learned about Model UN. Question 1. About how many students take part in Model UN each year? A. 10,000. B. 150,000. C. 250,000. D. 400,000. If you answered D, you know that about 400,000 students take part each year. Question 2. Model UN allows students to gain experience with which of the following skills? A. Research. B. Leadership. C. Public speaking. D. All of the above. The correct answer is D. Model UN students gain experience with all of these skills. Question 3. What is the goal of a Model UN committee? A. To work together to get their resolution passed. B. To make a presentation to another committee. C. To get the actual UN to consider their ideas. D. None of the above. The correct answer is A. The goal of a Model UN committee is to work together to get their resolution passed. Thinking question. What world events do you think students at this year's Model UN should discuss? Why?
It could be any day, anywhere. A hurricane is brewing. Like many problems, it knows no borders. But as the storm advances across the ocean, it is tracked by satellite. Ships are directed to the shelter of safe harbors. People are warned to evacuate. It's a coordinated response made possible by the international system that shapes our world, the United Nations and its family of agencies. When natural disaster strikes, the United Nations is often the first on the ground, working with governments, aid groups, and volunteers to bring emergency humanitarian relief. This is just one aspect of the UN's work, which includes bringing clean water to communities in need, vaccinating children, helping farmers to improve their harvest, and much, much more. But this is not how the United Nations started. After the devastation of World War II, the world needed a workshop for peace, a way to avoid the scourge of war. The solution? An assembly of nations where leaders of countries big and small could debate and seek consensus on common action. Today, the United Nations is the one truly global forum with 192 nations represented in the General Assembly. It's the 15-member Security Council that focuses on peace and security, taking action to avert war, resolve conflicts, and limit armaments. It hasn't always worked, but since 1945, the UN has brokered countless peace settlements, and it now keeps the peace in many places across the globe. From Haiti to Lebanon, from Timor-Leste to Liberia, from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Sudan, and in more than a dozen other missions around the world. Places where others cannot or will not go. Places where innocent men, women and children have been forced to flee and have nowhere to go.
At home was war. We never knew who was fighting. We were sad to leave, and one day we want to return.
For some 30 million refugees and displaced persons in more than 100 countries, the United Nations family is providing blankets, tents, books, and ways for people to restart their lives.
Please help stop the war for the sake of the children.
There are as many as 250,000 child soldiers in the world. The UN fights for their freedom and helps them to be children once again. And for people in some 30 countries plagued by landmines and unexploded bombs, the UN helps diffuse the threat of fatal or crippling explosions.
We have saved thousands of lives.
When the guns fall silent, the UN helps to build national institutions, trains the police, assists the justice systems, and supports democratic elections. To sustain peace, development is needed. Development that includes the poorest, almost 1 billion people on Earth, 1 out of every 6, who struggle to survive on less than $1 a day. World leaders have formed a global partnership that sets 8 goals for humanity, collectively known as the Millennium Development Goals. To end extreme poverty, to combat disease and hunger, to promote gender equality, and ensure environmental sustainability. Much remains to be done by the target year 2015, but a real difference has already been made in people's lives. In improving maternal health, by providing health care to pregnant women. In combating the deadly impact of malaria, especially in Africa, and in fighting HIV and AIDS.
I did the test. My husband also did the test. Both tests were negative.
The UN has seen great success in combating disease. Smallpox has been eradicated. Today, the UN is making strides in tackling polio, measles, and other preventable diseases.
We can point to undeniable progress. 3 million more children now survive each year. An additional 2 million people receive treatment for AIDS, and millions more children are in school.
Schooling is a basic human right, one of many enshrined in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948. Decades later, it is still the standard against which all societies and all governments are measured.
No government today dares to say that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is none of their business.
Still, for all too many, respect for the dignity and rights of human beings everywhere remains a distant vision. The United Nations dispatches independent experts to investigate complaints of human rights violations and urges governments to uphold their responsibility to protect civilians. Today, more than ever, the world needs united action to face the many challenges of the new millennium.
We hold the future in our hands. Together, we must ensure that our grandchildren will not have to ask why we have failed to do the right things and left to them to suffer the consequences.
The consequences of a planet in peril. Today, the United Nations is urgently supporting its member states in partnership with civil society and people of goodwill to reach a global, comprehensive and effective plan of action that will address climate change. Uniting in action for the common good. That's what the UN is all about, today and in the future, so that years from now, whenever and wherever the clouds gather, people in need can still find shelter from the storm.
Did you know that the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a universal call to action that unites 193 countries around the world? If these global goals are fulfilled by 2030, life on Earth will be better for everyone. So, what are these goals? Eliminate poverty in all its forms. No hunger. Everyone should have safe, nutritious, and sufficient food. Everyone has equal access to healthcare, thus ensuring our well-being and a healthy life. Equal access to a quality education. Ensure gender equality where women and girls have the same opportunities as men and boys. By achieving these goals, each member of our society will be equal, safe, and happy. UN global goals also include access to safe drinking water and sanitation, access to clean energy that is safe for people and the environment, sustainable and stable economic growth. Everyone has a decent job, strong infrastructure, and the support of innovations. Lower inequality within and among countries. Cities and settlements be developed without damaging the environment and people. Achieving these goals will result in the well-being of people and our planet. We can further take care of our environment with the following goals: sustainable and safe production and consumption of products. Take urgent measures to reduce climate change and its impact. Ensure the sustainable use and protection of ocean and sea resources. Restore and protect Earth's ecosystems. By achieving these goals, we will form a society where strong institutions ensure peace and justice. It is important for everyone to be involved and to build partnerships for achieving sustainable development goals. You are part of this process. Demand the implementation of these goals. Take the lead and share information with your friends.
We can be.
We must be the first generation
to end extreme poverty.
The generation
most determined
to fight injustice and inequalities.
The generation that saves the planet from climate change.
And this is how it will get done. The global goals.
A 15-year plan
For everyone. Everywhere.
with no one left behind.
We will live in a world
Where nobody
anywhere lives in extreme poverty.
Where no one
goes hungry.
Where no one
wakes in the morning
asking if there will be food today.
We will live in a world where no child has to die of
Diseases we know how to cure.
and where proper health care
is a lifelong right for us all.
We will live in a world where
Everyone
goes to school.
And education gives us the knowledge
and skills
for a fulfilling life.
We will live in a world where all girls and all women have equal opportunities to
thrive
and be powerful
and safe.
We cannot succeed if half the world is handballed.
We will live in a world
where all people can get clean water
And proper toilets
at home, at school, and at work.
We will live in a world where there's sustainable energy for everyone.
heat, light,
and power for the whole planet.
Without destroying the planet.
We'll live in a world where economies prosper and new wealth
Leads to decent jobs.
for everyone.
And we will live in a world where our industry,
Our infrastructure and our
Best innovations.
Are not just used to make money, but to make all our lives better.
we will live in a world
Where prejudices and extremes of inequality
Are defeated.
inside our countries
And between different countries.
where people live in cities and communities
that are safe, progressive,
And support everyone who lives there.
where we replace
What we consume. Planet where we put back what we take out of the earth.
We live in a world that is decisively rolling back the threat of climate
change.
where we restore and protect the life in our oceans and seas.
will restore and protect
Life on land,
The forests, animals,
the earth itself.
with peace between and inside countries.
where all governments are open.
and answer to us for what they do at home and abroad.
And the justice rules.
With everyone equal before the law.
Where all countries and we their people
Work together.
partnerships of all kinds to make
A reality.
These are the United Nations global goals
For sustainable development.
Let's get to work.
Good morning, class. Today we're going to have a very special lesson. It is about goals to make the world a better place that leaders from every country have been working on.
Mr. Clark, what is a goal?
That is an excellent question. Remember when you told me last week that you wanted to get an A on your math exam?
Yes.
That was a goal that you set for yourself. And what did you do to reach that goal?
Well, I made sure that I did all of my homework and I studied all of the multiplication tables with my older brother.
That's right. And you got an A on your exam yesterday. These goals for the world are the same idea, except they are much bigger goals. The people of the world will need to work together to reach those goals, just like you and your brother did for your math exam. Class, I want you to think about this word for a moment. Poverty. What does this word mean to you?
I think about people that don't have a house or food, so they have to ask for money on the street.
That is a good answer. Ending poverty is the first goal that our leaders have called for. It is very important for every person to have their basic needs met so they can live a happier life with dignity. The government can help provide support to people that need it, and our businesses can create jobs so that people can have enough money to provide for themselves and their families. However, there are other needs that people have in order to have a good life. What do you think are some other things that children and their families need?
I think it's important that children have doctor and medicine to help them when they are sick.
You're right. It is very important for children and adults to have healthy lives and access to medical care, vaccines and medicines. This will help to reduce and eliminate diseases that make children very sick. Also, children need nutritious food and clean water to be able to grow up strong and healthy. Class, what about school? Do you think this is also important?
Yes!
In our school, the teachers are providing you with the skills and knowledge to help you throughout your life. However, there are many millions of children who do not get to go to school. Sometimes it is because they are girls, or because they have a disability, or because they live really far away. It is a right for every child to get to go to school and to learn when they are there. That is why education is another goal that our leaders have set.
What about playing? Isn't that important too? I want to go outside and play with my friends, but there is no park near my house, and my mom says it is too dangerous.
You bring up two very good points. It is important that our cities and towns have good services like easy transportation, safe housing, water and electricity. And yes, spaces for you to be able to play outside with your friends. However, you have also brought up the issue of safety, which is another important goal. Children should not live in fear because of wars or violence in their homes and communities. Now back to our discussion on poverty. Is it only about money? What else is poverty about?
Well, I think sometimes people are treated badly because they are poor, that the world isn't fair with everyone.
That is very true, and that is why reducing inequalities is another goal. Our leaders want everyone to have an equal start, so they don't get left behind. That means that everyone has equal rights, no matter the color of their skin, what religion they practice, if they are a boy or a girl, if they are poor or rich, or any other difference between us.
What about animals, Mrs. Clark? Are there goals for them too?
Yes, there are. People must live in a world where oceans, trees, and animals are protected and valued.
Our leaders have a lot of goals. How did they come up with that list?
Well, our leaders wanted to make sure that all of the important issues are covered, and they learned about what is important from people around the world. Our leaders have asked children and young people like yourselves, but also business people, people who do community work, parents, farmers, teachers. They have heard ideas from millions of people, including those living in vulnerable conditions. They will now need all of your help for achieving these goals.
How can we help?
Well, it starts with children around the world learning about the goals like all of you are today. When you have this information, you can then take action. For example, remember how your Girl Scout troop has been working together over the last few weeks to clean up public parks in our city. Well, you were working on some of these sustainable development goals. You just didn't know it at the time. We also have the right to ask leaders what they are doing to make progress on the goals. For example, are they spending enough money on schools and hospitals so that children are educated and all people can get treated when they are sick?
Wow, we could actually make a difference on the goals.
You are the difference. These goals will not be achieved without all of you and other children around the world taking action. Remember, these goals are about your future and creating the world you want for yourselves, your families, and the next generations of children.